this is the coolest thing I did. I think the most interesting. I went to the Geospatial Intelligence Officers course, which is the satellite course, basically. So I learned about like satellites and how to use them to collect intelligence, and then got qualified to actually task satellites to take pictures, which is like super. You would think it's some like high tech system they use.
My mind instantly goes, all right, blink twice if there are aliens out there that you took pictures of.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is a new
everybody.
podcast.
It might have been like demon possessed. It was a fairly large, mutated looking chicken.
We were born in the north, but we grew up in the south.
We learned all of our words from Pennsylvania.
And people are like, that's a toboggan. That little toboggan
Not
there.
a toboggan. A toboggan is a sled. Okay.
0.3 inches, baby.
Dude, I can't take it. Well, thank you very much for being here. Obviously, it means a lot.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, kind of jumping right into it. I mean, we take this podcast primarily to hear people's stories, creative individuals, people just with interesting experiences, and we've actually known you since I was basically like 7th grade almost.
Yeah.
I've known of you.
Young.
I was really young, and you were in high school, and I actually joined the same Boy Scout troop that you were getting your eagle and coming out of around the same time. And so kind of from there, I've heard whispers of fascinating things that you've done and been a part of. You went to West Point.
They're all lies. All lies.
I doubt it, but you went to West Point.
Yep.
You were in the military. I don't know a lot about your military career.
Yeah.
We can talk about it if you'd like to.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know exactly to what extent. I don't know. See, I know people have maybe been exaggerating as far as what you've done in the military. Like,
Probably,
I've heard people say like you were on top secret missions and all different kinds of stuff, and that is probably not true.
When you get things second or third or fourth hand, sometimes it gets a little bit skewed.
Yeah,
Probably.
yeah.
I don't know what you've heard, so I can't vouch for it, but I can tell you if you're
Yeah,
curious.
I mean, if you want to
wanna-
just tell us what you did in the military, and then we'll backtrack and maybe.
Oh, well, let's first give an intro, though. Can you just give us who you are?
Let's back up a little bit from there. And I just told you guys, but just for everybody else listening, I have an older dog, and she's in the room, and she has a cough. So if you hear her hacking and coughing, she's fine.
Okay.
But that's all it is. So she will survive. She'll live to fight another day. So my name is Andrew Ligon Fant. I'd gone by both my first and middle name throughout my life in different times, and my last name. In high school I was Fant, but now I go by Ligon here at the law school, and I answered all three names. But yeah, like you said, I met your family kind of through my parents and family connections. And I didn't really know you guys well, but we've definitely crossed paths, and I've talked to you before.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm originally from Rock Hill, South Carolina, basically the same area as you guys. You guys probably lived 10, 15 minutes out or so. Went to Northwestern High School, graduated in 2007. Let's see, from there, like you said, I was in Boy Scouts. When I was in high school, I loved backpacking, loved outdoor stuff. Wasn't big into hunting, not because I dislike it, but mostly because I just never really had the time to get into it. But otherwise, like outdoor stuff, I loved it. I knew from the time I was like 13 that I wanted to go into the military, and by the time I was like 16 or 17, I was dialed in on, I knew I wanted to go to West Point. That's where I wanted to go to school.
Yeah.
And for anybody who's unfamiliar, West Point is the United States Military Academy. So it's a university run by the Army. It's counterparts of the Naval Academy in Annapolis, the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. And then some people would be angry if I didn't say the Coast Guard Academy and the Merchant Marine Academy. But at any rate, these are all federally run universities. So I went up there in 2007. Let's see, what did I do? So for the first year there is called plebe year. It's a little rough. All the hazing rituals. They don't call it hazing, but that's what it is. I played rugby for a year. I took a look around and like everybody was getting really banged up. We had like 3 skull fractures the year that I played.
Yeah. Wow.
And so I was like, I loved rugby, had a good time. The team was amazing, but I was like, I should probably go do something more sustainable. So I joined the judo team, which turned out to be a good idea, but also a bad idea.
Yeah. I'm curious, when you were deciding on West Point, so from a young age, I think you said it was 14, you knew you wanted to be in the military.
Yeah.
So what about West Point was it that attracted you then?
So it's hard to pin it down to one thing, but I would say I applied to 2 schools. One was Clemson, one was West Point. The biggest attraction was that I wanted to be in the Army. And that was that's kind of the traditional route to become an Army officer, is go to the military academy. Only about a quarter of officers who commission every year come out of the academy, but it's the traditional way to do it. I had some family connections who were West Point grads. It didn't help me at all. Because connections don't really get you anywhere unless there are some exceptions. If your dad is a big time general in the Army or something, you're gonna have a better chance of getting in. But really, family connections don't help too much. But what they did do is they got me interested, and they kind of exposed me to it at an early age. And what I saw was a school where all the other schools kind of laid out the red carpet and told me everything they could do for me. West Point was more like, yeah, we're not going to do that. We're going to tell you what you can do for us, and we're going to make you earn it. Okay. And there was something about that when I was young that was really enticing. I think it still is. I think a lot of people naturally seek challenges, and it seemed impossibly difficult. Yeah. It wasn't, spoiler alert, it was not impossible. It's very doable. People tell me all the time, like, I don't know how you did that. I could never do that. You could. It's just a matter of doing it.
A lot of discipline, I'm guessing.
Yeah. And, people come into West Point from every different background, all over the country. They recruit kids from everywhere from Samoa to, Florida. So you get people from all different backgrounds, all different cultures, and, families and stuff like that. So not everybody comes in super disciplined, but they teach you. And the rules are very strict. I mean, your first year there is pretty brutal. I can't speak to exactly what it's like right now, but when I went through in 2007, like when our first year there, for example, the entire first year we weren't allowed to speak outside unless spoken to. So if you're walking from, say, like your dorm, we call them barracks, but your dorm room to an academic building, you couldn't like stop and say hey to your friend.
Oh, wow.
You just had to like walk by them. So that was kind of interesting. You had to like march everywhere. So you had to like cup your hands and walk real fast. There's rules about everything. So there's rules about where your underwear goes in your drawers, where your, how you fold your sheets and how you make your bed and stuff like that. So I think it definitely taught me a lot of discipline. It also what it really teaches, I think, is it teaches time management. So the one thing they do there really well is, and there are pros and cons to this, but they really overload the students there with work. Intentionally, they give you more than you can do on purpose. And so like my first semester there, I think I took 23 credit hours, and then I had, everybody has to play a sport. So I was playing rugby about 2 hours a day. So, and then you have your military duties and military training and stuff like that. It adds up to a lot. So what you end up with is a situation where you really can't do everything. You can't do all your homework and go to practice and do all your military duties and clean your room correctly and shine your shoes and shine your belt buckle. You can't do everything. So you end up, it really teaches you to kind of prioritize and manage time, and also to work together. So in some cases, like one guy who's really good at shining shoes would shine a bunch of people's shoes, and then they would do other things for him, if that makes sense. Yeah. So it teaches a lot of things. It teaches you to be humble. That's for sure. The first year was very, very humbling, and they call it hero to zero. You know, they bring in all these, you know, hotshot kids from across the country who were captain of the football team or captain of the track team or whatever, and then all of a sudden you're just nobody. You're just one of you're just a number, basically.
Yeah.
To give you an example, like I was in pretty good shape when I left Rock Hill.
I would say you were in very good shape compared to the people around the area.
Yes, a lot of it just depends on who you're comparing to. So I worked out and ran all the time trying to get ready for West Point, and I get there and I'm in this unit. The unit that I'm in for my basic training, they call it Beast Barracks, was just insane. It was the track and cross country unit. So all the kids who got recruited for track and cross country were in my company, which is like a small unit. So we take our first physical fitness test, and I ran a 13-minute flat 2 mile, which for a 210 pound dude, it's not too bad.
That's
it's quick, but for the Army, it's like, it's max points, but it's nothing more. It's right at max points. I was the slowest guy in my squad by far.
Were you the biggest guy in your squad?
Yeah, I mean, I was, but I was also the slowest, and that's when you're running, that's not great. You know, we had a guy, he was just so fast. His name is Alexis, and he ran a 9-minute 40-second 2 mile that during Beast.
I don't even think I could do.
And so that was just like when all of a sudden you're not the best at anything.
Yeah.
And at best you're like sort of good at something. It's pretty humbling.
Yeah.
So it was a unique experience, and it had pros and cons as the service academies do. But I mean, I wouldn't trade it for anything. It was great.
I have a question. So I want to go back and talk about judo. That you brought that up a minute, but how does that transition, like going from West Point, you're doing all this like stuff already being not in the military, but in a military school, going into the military? Does that help you? How does that help you more than people who are just going straight into the military?
Well, it doesn't necessarily help more. It just kind of depends. So if you want to be an Army officer, there are basically 3 ways to do it. There's more, but basically 3 ways. One is to go to officer candidate school. This is the route I think most people take. It might be a toss-up between that and ROTC, but one is officer candidate school. So basically you go to college, you get a degree, and then you go talk to a recruiter. They send you to the Army. You go through basic training. Then they send you to officer candidate school. You go through this whole officer candidate school process, and then you're an Army officer. So it's a pretty quick way to do it. And that is a completely legitimate way to become an Army officer. There's nothing wrong with it. I mean, you know, they get great training. Nothing wrong with it at all. Another route is the Reserve Officer Training Corps, or ROTC. So if you go to like Clemson or University of South Carolina or any of those, you know, any big school pretty much has a ROTC program. And what you do there is you're at a civilian school, but during that you're also doing military training.
Oh, okay.
And you go and you do military classes and stuff like that. And when you graduate, you commission as either a reserve or active duty officer, one or the other. It just depends on if you get an active slot. And then the third way, which is, like I said, it's the more traditional way, I guess. I suppose the most traditional would just be like direct commissions, where they just hand somebody a commission and say, hey, congratulations, you're an Army officer, like George Washington. Sorry,
You're good.
I worked out earlier, so I'm really thirsty. So the more traditional way I would say is the service academies. Yeah. And when you go to West Point, I think if it does give you an advantage, it's that you're in school, and everybody you're in school with for 4 years, who you have shared experiences with, and you share hardship, and you build camaraderie with them, all of them are going to be in the Army.
Okay.
And the quality control there is very high. So like most people are really good. There are some people who maybe fall through the cracks and aren't so great, but for the most part, like on average, people are pretty good. So you're basically with a bunch of pretty good to really good people I take that back, two phenomenal, incredible superhero type people. And you're going to be in the Army with them. And what that kind of translates to is like, both when you're in the Army and after you get out of the Army, you have this incredible network of people who you just know. So like, all the time when I was in the Army, I'd be like, you know, hey, I'm trying to coordinate with this unit over there. Oh, hey, John or whoever, my buddy from West Point, is their operations officer. Let me go talk to him. So instead of having to break through all these barriers, I'd just be like, hey, John, what's up, man? Haven't seen you in like 10 years, but not 10 years, but you know, whatever. Sometimes it makes things a lot easier if you went to a service academy, only because you know a lot of the people. Whereas if you go through one of the other two routes, you're only going to really be close to like, you know, I want to say an ROTC class maybe 10 to 20, and OCS class maybe, I don't want to guess. It's bigger than that, but so they're going to have a close group of people that size. Whereas at a service academy, you have a much larger network. Gotcha. After a few years, I wouldn't say like the officers view each other differently. So like if I know somebody went to Clemson and did Army ROTC, I wouldn't assume anything about them versus if they went to West Point, but I might know them already if they went to West Point, which just makes things easier.
Yeah,
so
that makes sense.
Also, if you go to a service academy, you also automatically are commissioned into the active Army. Whereas if you go ROTC, a lot of times you'll get a reserve commission, so you'll be in the reserves. So if you want to be active for sure, then the most surefire way is kind of to go to a service academy.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So that's West Point. I think I might have missed a question about judo.
Yeah. Well, I was just saying, I wanted to go back because I know that. Yeah, I remember when you had to take some time off school because of that, and you want to get into that at all?
Yeah, sure. So I actually graduated from West Point in December of 2011. I was supposed to graduate in May of 2011. And the reason for that is that spring of 2009, I believe it was, I was on the judo team, and we were competing nationally. We were traveling around the country competing. And I was kind of in over my head, to be honest with you. One thing about the West Point judo team is that they have a lot of like former wrestlers and like fairly athletic people. Yeah. And because of that, they tend to do very well in judo on the national stage. But the problem is like they're not very experienced, and judo is one of those sports where you can really get messed up easily. Yeah. So what happened was I got I was in spring of 2009, I was in Virginia at the Virginia Open judo tournament, and I got tossed on my head, and I didn't get knocked out or anything like that, which is kind of strange, but I got a horrific concussion, to the point where I still don't remember any of the matches I fought there. And I fought, I think, 6 matches. Wow. But yeah, I didn't know where I was. I didn't know that I had fought 6 matches. So they took me to the hospital. I went up in the hospital overnight. I go back to West Point the next day with my team, and then I'm treated, they do all the standard stuff, CT scans, and, they're just screening me for concussion. Yeah. And sure enough, I had a concussion. Yeah. And so I kind of I recovered from that over the next 6 months or so. And they let me go back to judo, and I did, which is probably a mistake, but at, 21 or whatever, you're invincible. Yeah. So I go back to judo, and that fall I got another concussion, which really was kind of the nail in the coffin for a bit. Man. Because if you know anything about concussions, they're kind of cumulative.
Yeah. They get worse over time, like the more you get them.
Yeah. Yeah. If you get multiple, they really compound, the effects compound. So I wound up going from being an AB student to being a DNF student, like pretty quickly.
Wait, so so it affected your grades.
They sent me home. Yeah, I was really struggling. My short-term memory was just out the window. I couldn't remember things. I couldn't keep track of schedules. I was losing things all the time. I lost my backpack. with some textbooks in it, stuff like that. So I end up going home, spent, I guess, about 6 months or so at home, just doing nothing. And then had to go to Walter Reed Army Medical Center in the DC area several times to check in, and they would do some neurological screenings and stuff like that. And finally I passed all the tests they were giving me, and they let me back in. So I go back in the fall of 2010, and then I had missed a semester and a whole summer. So what I ended up having to do is I had to just stay an extra summer and then an extra semester, which turned out, it turned out the way it turned out. It's one of those things where, at the time it really seemed horrible. I didn't get to graduate with my classmates, which was huge disappointment. Yeah. All my classmates were out, doing great things while I was kind of stuck at school. Yeah. I also went through a pretty dark time there in 2011, because I had several friends die in combat. Oh, okay. And so here they were out. They weren't my classmates. They were. It was two of them that summer. They were both 1 and 2 years ahead of me, but it just made it all the more salient that I was stuck at West Point and I wasn't able to go out and train and go do what we were trying to do. Yeah. So that was pretty dark. And one of the main things I learned from that is, one, how bad concussions are. Yeah. And then 2 is you just have to trust that things are going to work out, because horrible things are going to happen to you in life and you can't always control it. And the truth is, you really don't know what would have happened if those things hadn't happened. Yeah. So you have to, I think you just kind of have to trust that the way things work is the way they were meant to work. And different religions have different names for that, but whether it's fate or, in Christianity, all things work together for good. And actually, this is something I talked to a guy about this on my podcast last week, but I think it's really important that whatever faith people draw from, it's really important to figure out how to really, truly believe deep down all things really do work together for good, because the other option is really just despair and losing hope. And that is not good for you. And it's also not good for anybody around you. Yeah. So that's kind of what I learned from it. So ultimately, I think it was a positive experience. In the grand scheme of things, it certainly didn't seem like that at the time. And it sometimes it's hard to see it that way, but what else, there's only one other way to see it. Yeah. And that's not good. Yeah.
So, I guess then moving out of school, getting into the military, could you walk us through briefly kind of different positions you held in the military, kind of what we started with that you said you'd tell us about?
Go back to.
Yeah, and sorry, it's warm in here. I should probably turn the AC on, but I'm not going to because it's going to get cold again. So after I graduated from West Point, so I graduated in December of 2011. I moved down to Fort Benning, Georgia in Columbus. So on the far west side of Georgia, on the border of Alabama. And I was initially in the Armor Corps. So the Armor Corps, on the officer side of the house, an armor officer does main battle tanks and then also armor reconnaissance. So main battle tanks, for anybody who's not familiar, are you can Google M1A2 Abrams. That's what I did. So I went to the armor school at Fort Benning, got qualified to lead a tank platoon or a scout platoon. And then after that, I went to the Army reconnaissance course, which was, it was 27 days and it was horrifically hot. It was in I think June and July, of 2012. And it was so hot. I think somebody can fact check me on this, but I think we started with 53 guys in the course and something like 22 had to drop out of the course because of heat injuries, like heat stroke and stuff like that. It was so hot. So I went to the reconnaissance course, where they really teach you how to lead reconnaissance formations, like cavalry, scout, platoons and stuff like that. From there, I knew that I was going to a unit that was deployed to Afghanistan, and that was the 2-7 Infantry in the 3rd Infantry Division, and that's in Savannah, Georgia.
Okay.
And I knew guys in that unit, and actually one of my good friends was in that unit. So I called him and said, "Hey, what's going on?" He said, "Hey, we're going to Afghanistan." So I decided to kind of stop training there. I finished the reconnaissance course, and I was like, I could have tried to go to more schools like Airborne or something like that. I was like, I'm going to Afghanistan. So I moved to Savannah, Georgia. I signed in with the 3rd Infantry Division, and they tell me basically pack your bags. We're going to Afghanistan in 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
So I was, 22, I guess at the time.
That's crazy to think about. Was I
22? I guess I was 22. Yeah. So in September of, I guess early September of 2012, we flew to Afghanistan via Kyrgyzstan. So we fly to Manas, Kyrgyzstan. And then from Manas, we fly to Bagram Air Base in eastern Afghanistan. And then from Bagram to Manas, which is not Manas, Mazar-e Sharif, which is in northern Afghanistan. And then I was in Mazar-e Sharif for about a month, I believe, with the battalion headquarters there. Now, the way a battalion works is a battalion is led by a lieutenant colonel. And then inside a battalion, you have multiple companies, and each company is led by a captain.
Okay.
And then in each company, you have generally 3 platoons, 3 or 4 platoons, depending on what kind of company it is. And each platoon is led by a lieutenant, which is what I was. I was a 2nd lieutenant, brand new, just green, very fresh. In fact, I never saw another 2nd lieutenant in Afghanistan.
Wow, really?
So there I was, and I was the only lieutenant in the battalion who was waiting to be a platoon leader. So basically I was there in case a platoon leader got fired or if somebody got injured or killed. So pretty soon into the deployment, my boss called me and was like, "Hey, we need you to replace a platoon leader." He wasn't injured or killed. So we need you to replace a platoon leader down in southwest Afghanistan. So I was like, okay, got it. So I packed up my bags and flew down to Helmand province, which is it's the Marine Corps' area of operations down there. And it was hot, both temperature wise and enemy wise.
Yeah.
It was definitely the hottest area in Afghanistan as far as enemy activity went. And then in the summer it was about 120 degrees every day.
Holy cow. Is it humid in the desert out there, or is it
just
very
dry? Very dry.
Okay.
Yeah, real dry and real hot. If you ask Andy Woods, he knows. We operate in the exact same area. I don't think we were there at the same time, if I'm not mistaken, but we operate in the same areas. So I go down there and I take over a platoon in Afghanistan, and the platoon's job was really convoluted. So I'm not going to try to make it too complicated. It doesn't really matter, but basically our job was to provide convoy security for a supply convoy that would resupply special operations outposts.
Okay. Gotcha.
Which is a very dangerous job.
Yeah.
It's, one of the more dangerous jobs in a counterinsurgency war like that is being on the roads. If you have to be on the roads, it's not good, because that's where you get improvised explosive devices, you get ambushes, you get all sorts of stuff. So we did that for, I guess I did that. My platoon did that for 9 months. I was down there for like 7.5 or 8 months or something like that. And it was wild. I mean, the interesting thing about doing something like that is it's hard to even describe, because it's like a different world kind of.
It sounds like it.
It was kind of like going to Mars, sort of.
Mars at war.
But we worked with, we worked with, a SEAL team, an Army Special Forces team, and then a handful of Marine Special Operations teams. And, sometimes it was great working with them. Sometimes it was horrible. Sometimes I worked directly for the Marine Corps, which Sometimes it's great. Sometimes it's horrible.
Yeah.
Just depended on the day.
Yeah.
But so we were there for a while, and thank God we didn't lose any soldiers. Awesome. My entire company didn't even have a single wounded in action.
Awesome. That's great.
It's not for lack of trying. I mean, we had one, so I'll give you an idea. One squad. Now this squad was in a really, really hot area, but I believe Timbo can correct me on this if you want, but I believe they were in 393 firefights in 9 months.
What?
So you can do the math on that, but it's 9 months.
It's 365 days in a year. That's many every day.
Yeah, it's more than an average of one a day.
Wow.
Yeah. And somehow we didn't lose anybody. One guy unfortunately did pass away due to an accident, but not due to combat. We didn't lose anybody to combat. We didn't really have any significant injuries. So we were definitely felt like I had a guardian angel there with me.
Do you think that might be because of the skill and the training that was involved, or did it feel in the moment kind of like just luck,
Well, I think it was a combination of things. One is that my platoon was very well trained. Yeah. So like they had done a lot of training before they deployed, and I can't take credit for that because I wasn't the platoon leader. Yeah. But the platoon leader before me and the platoon sergeant who was there, the platoon sergeant is the senior enlisted guy in the platoon. And normally it's kind of a weird dynamic because the platoon leader is like a 22-year-old lieutenant. And the platoon sergeant is typically, I don't know, let's call it 33, 34.
That is an odd dynamic.
And has been in the military for 15 years or so. That can vary, but that's a good estimate. So you have this like old guy who's been around forever who works for this really young guy. But it works out. If people kind of play their part, it works out fine. But the platoon sergeant there he was a tank commander in the invasion of Iraq. Like he had been around the block a time or two. So he was really good. And then the soldiers were just really good. Like some of them were just, hotheads and stuff like that. And not fun to be in charge of, but they were good people. Yeah. They know who they are. Yeah. We had this one guy, and he said, LT, you won't like me back in garrison, which means back in like the US, because he was really good in combat, but he wasn't a good soldier back in the States. So, some of them aren't necessarily the people you would think would be like super soldiers, and not necessarily the people you would think would be even good soldiers, but they were good. Yeah. So, they were great at just like, I think that the main thing there was just doing like the routine little mundane things well. They did that. And then having a plan for when something goes wrong, and they did that. So I won't take credit for it. Some of it does come down to judgment. There were a couple times when you do have to make judgment calls, and I think that made a big difference. Yeah. But overall, I mean, it had very little to do with me. And it had to do with the fact that all these guys were well trained, and they were, they had a lot of experience.
That's awesome.
So, and they were also like, some of these guys are just so cool under pressure. It's incredible. Some of them are not, but some of them absolutely freak out. Yeah. And then, the stress is, it's hard to even explain the stress, but the stress of driving on those roads 3-4 days a week for, that long is really intense.
Like it's hard doing
especially because like,
it seems like it'd be hard doing it once, but you're doing it all the time. Well,
it's really, so the first time you do it is really, it's uniquely terrifying. Yeah. But then it becomes routine, and it's less scary, I suppose, the second, third, fourth, 15th, 30th time you do it. But what doesn't go away is like this kind of background stress of just like always kind of being tense. Like the first mission I went on, the very first mission I went on, and it was with the guy I was replacing, the truck in front of us hit a improvised explosive device, so IED.
Yeah.
And it looks a lot worse than it is because there was so much dust. We're in the desert. So we're out in the desert, and the desert in Afghanistan is not like the beach.
Yeah.
So like at the beach, the sand is like real coarse, you know, it's like tiny pebbles. Ooh, lightning, thunder. The sand there is very different. I always described it as like baby powder.
Oh yeah.
It's like a talcum powder consistency.
Yeah.
So when you have an explosion, it throws this dust, like even a relatively small explosion will throw dust like 200-300 feet in the air.
Yeah.
And it kind of like mushrooms. So it looks like they just got hit by a nuke.
Oh gosh.
And I thought it scared me so bad, as it would, I think, anybody. But, you know, I thought these guys were going to be evaporated, but they were fine.
Yeah.
They survived.
Wow.
Yeah, it was wild. It was a really unique experience. And, I still actually keep up with a lot of those soldiers. I get messages from them, I don't know, every couple of weeks probably. And then maybe once a month, one will call me. Some of them still have some demons that they struggle with, which I can sympathize with.
Yeah.
In fact, one of my old soldiers just messaged me on Facebook. I just haven't read it yet, but I will. Yeah, it's a unique experience. I think a lot of guys who experience that and then come back to kind of the mundane modern existence, they end up missing it, it's hard to explain to people. And for a lot of them, it's hard for them to wrap their heads around, but they do actually end up missing it, which is kind of odd.
Yeah. I guess I'm not going to try to guess, but do you think it has anything to do with adrenaline or brotherhood, or what is it wrapped around?
So both of those I think are right on the money. Yeah. So I think it's both adrenaline and there's a guy named Sebastian Junger. He wrote The Perfect Storm. I don't know if you ever saw the movie. He was basically a conflict journalist his entire life. And he spent like 17 years of his life in combat, I think. I could be off on that. He spent many years of his life in combat. And he wrote a book that he shot a documentary with a guy named Tim Hetherington, who was later killed in Libya, called Restrepo, Restrepo. And it's a phenomenal documentary about a company, a light infantry company in the Korangal Valley of Afghanistan. And in that documentary, you can kind of see the raw brotherhood those guys have.
Okay.
I mean, these guys are living like in the boonies for their entire deployment. Yeah. And all they have to do is play cards and, you know, snap each other with towels and wrestle. And they kind of revert back to this kind of tribal nature that humans really have, that we've had suppressed our entire lives. So after that experience, let's see, he wrote a book called, I think the book is called, I might have it on my bookshelf. I probably gave it away. I think it's called War or something like that.
Okay.
But basically the book that goes with the documentary Restrepo. And then he wrote a book called Tribe. Okay. Which I'm looking on my bookshelf, but I think I give away most of my books, so I don't have many of them anymore. But he wrote a book called Tribe. And that book explores like why PTSD has risen so much in the last, say, half century. And his hypothesis, I don't know if he's right, I think he probably is that people experience this tribal brotherhood, kind of like you alluded to, because they're in this situation that we're kind of wired for. Granted, it's a much more high-tech situation than maybe we're wired for, but you find yourself in this situation where you're in a small band of like kind of bandits, and you're out there and you're trying to, you have kind of this vague mission, but ultimately you have an enemy, and you are each trying to keep each other alive from that enemy. And it really does. I mean, all of the politics and all that stuff kind of goes out the window when you're there. It really, it really boils down to, I have a job and I have a thing I need to do. And if this guy's going to get in my way, we're going to duke it out, and all these guys are going to have my back.
Yeah.
And that's pretty addictive because guys come back to the, the real world, if you will, if you want to call this the real world. And they feel alone. They feel like nobody has their back.
Yeah.
They feel like you'll hear soldiers say a lot of times, I wish I could just go back to Afghanistan, or I wish I could just go back to Iraq. 'Cause things are simpler. Somebody gives them food. They don't have to go grocery shopping. They have a job. They have their friends, and it's that simple.
Yeah,
so I think that's the main reason I think guys miss it. I think there's also something about the adrenaline as well.
Yeah.
I think that's a much smaller part of it, but I do think that some guys get kind of addicted to the adrenaline.
Yeah. That's fascinating.
Where did you, so you're talking about being in like Afghanistan and stuff, and then at the beginning of the podcast, you talk about living in Hawaii. How did you go from there to Hawaii?
Okay, so I was stationed at Fort Stewart, Georgia. That's near Savannah. So we deployed from Savannah to Afghanistan.
Okay.
So when we came back from Afghanistan, I was still at Fort Stewart in that same unit for another like two more years, I guess. And from there we did some training stuff, and I was a tank platoon leader technically when I was in Afghanistan, but we didn't have tanks. And then, they moved me over to what's called the Battalion Scout Platoon, which is like the reconnaissance. It's a small reconnaissance unit for the battalion. So I was a scout platoon leader for about a year, and then I move up, and I was helping out in the operations section, so helping write orders and plan and stuff like that. And we got orders to go to Eastern Europe. So we go over to Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania. This is right after Russia invaded Crimea. So President Obama wanted tanks on the Russian border. So we're sitting over there doing training, shooting tank rounds, and it was a good time. And then we're there for about 6 months, and we come back, and then I made a switch to military intelligence. So I went from the Armor Corps to the Military Intelligence Corps.
And this is where all the conspiracy theories about you come in.
They're all lies. All lies.
All lies. There's nothing secret about that you like can't share. Like if I know there's like one thing that you have a secret of that you can't share, makes it so much more intriguing.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure it would. And so here's where it gets kind of weird. So I don't want to talk bad about my fellow veterans. However, a lot of people will try to make their careers sound more interesting than they really were. Because I think a lot of guys don't realize that, it's your story. You just got to tell your story. Like everybody's story is interesting, which is part of the reason I started my podcast, for example.
Absolutely.
It's kind of the same reason you guys are doing it, just to hear, because this seems incredibly boring to me. I'm sure there's a theoretical person out there that might find this
I promise a lot of people are going to enjoy this one.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So, but to me, it seems boring. Yeah. So I think a lot of guys get out of the military and they're like, they went into the military thinking they were going to be like, special operations and SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force and all this stuff. And then they were just an infantryman, and they just went to Afghanistan twice. Yeah. And they just, they were just in combat 30 times, and they didn't do anything compared to the people they know. They didn't do anything important. And I am not talking about anybody in particular right now. I promise. Yeah. So if this sounds like you, you need to deal with your own demons. I'm not talking about you. And I think a lot of people fall into the temptation to make their career sound like it was more than it was. And so they'll say, oh, well, I can't, I would tell you, but I can't, because that was top secret. And that's,
it's not true most of the time, probably.
The reality is, if that were true, they just wouldn't tell you that.
Yeah. That's,
they wouldn't tell you that in the first place.
See, that's like, if you start thinking about it, you're like, well, why would they even tell me they have a secret?
Yeah.
Now, there are things that I won't tell you, but I'm not going to say, oh yeah, and then I did this, but I can't tell you.
Yeah.
That's top secret. That's not how it works. So,
there are secrets.
So I switched over to military intelligence, and the military intelligence corps' job is basically to, basically to be the knowledge base on the enemy, whatever the enemy means in a given situation. And a military intelligence officer's job, typically, depending on what your specific job is, when we work for a commander, our job is to help the commander understand the enemy and the environment. So everything from terrain to weather to the enemy and how the enemy is affected by the terrain and the weather and what the enemy is likely to do and how we can use, drones and satellites and stuff to figure out what the enemy is doing and all this stuff. That's basically what an intelligence officer does. So I went to Fort Huachuca, Arizona. I had to go through some training for that. So I went to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, did about 6 months, 7-8 months worth of training in Fort Huachuca, which is out in the middle of nowhere. I loved it. It's phenomenal. If you ever get a chance to go to Arizona, do it. I bought a dirt bike. I could see Mexico from my house. Wow. No kidding. That's not a lie.
That's awesome.
We were 10 miles as the crow flies from the border wall, and I could see the border. If I look south from my house, I could see down the valley, see the border wall, and then see into Mexico. It's amazing. You ever seen the movie Tombstone?
No, I've heard of it actually, but I haven't seen it. I don't think.
Add it to your list.
Tombstone.
Add it to your list. Right. It's a phenomenal movie, and that Tombstone is where the gunfight at the OK Corral happened. Okay. That's about 10 minutes from Fort Huachuca. Fort Huachuca is an old Indian Wars outpost. Anyways, all that to say, I go to Fort Huachuca. I go through a transition course to, transition me from a knuckle dragging armor officer into a bow tie wearing intelligence officer. Not really. And then I go through the captain's career course, which is a course for captains to, it's in the name. So I was a new captain. Go through the military intelligence career course, and then that's my dog making noise. She's getting bored.
She's all right.
And then I go through this was the coolest thing I did. I think the most interesting. I went to the Geospatial Intelligence Officers course, which is the satellite course, basically. So I learned about like satellites and how to use them to collect intelligence, and then got qualified to actually task satellites to take pictures, which is like super. You would think it's some like high tech system they use.
My mind instantly goes, all right, blink twice if there are aliens out there that you took pictures of.
It's like, we're talking like the software they use to task these satellites is like 1995 technology. It's brutal.
Oh, really?
But it's fascinating. And in fact, when I went through that course, we took our class picture with a satellite.
That's cool.
Which is pretty neat. Yeah. So we tasked a satellite, and then we all went and stood outside and took a picture, and we downloaded it.
Okay, so compared to like Google Earth, is it a lot higher quality, I'm guessing? Like you zoom in farther?
That I can't tell you.
Oh, I tapped into something. I'm sorry.
You can probably use your imagination though.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. You could probably find that on Wikipedia if you were to look. That's the kind of stuff I actually. All right,
I won't ask any more detailed questions about technology.
No, feel free to. There are some things though, like in the Intel world, that actually are classified.
Gotcha. I got you.
It's not that it's that interesting, to be honest with you. It's just like, especially when you get into like data like that, like numbers, technical data on equipment, it starts to become classified pretty quickly.
Yeah, I understand.
Because the military wants to protect mainly its methods. So the way classification works is they mainly classify what do they call it? Methods, means, and methods. Oh, I'm already forgetting the terminology, but basically the ways they collect intelligence are what they want to protect.
Gotcha.
Because if the bad guys know how we collect intelligence, then they can counteract it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So from there, I went, believe it or not, I didn't want to go to Hawaii.
Oh, really?
I wanted to go to, so my same friend who I went to Afghanistan with, he was at Fort Bragg, North Carolina in the 82nd Airborne, and they were going to Iraq.
Really?
And so I was like, I'm going with you.
Okay, you wanted to go there instead of Hawaii.
So I wanted to go as his intelligence officer.
Okay.
So I begged and pleaded with my branch manager, and she said, no, you're going to Hawaii. And I was like, okay, I'll go to Hawaii. So I went out to Hawaii, and let me see. first I worked at like a strategic intelligence unit, and we collected, our main job was to collect information about a certain country west of Hawaii that you can probably imagine what country that is. Big country. So that was our main focus, and that was pretty cool.
She's all right.
Dog's getting bored.
She's all right.
So I did that for 2 years, and then I switched and went down to a aviation unit and did what I really wanted to do, and that was tactical level intel. So I worked for an aviation unit, first a brigade, which had like Apaches. They had a Black Hawk squadron. They had a mixed squadron. And then I went and I worked for the Apache squadron and we traveled and we went to California and stuff like that. And it was super cool. And our pilots were in the LA Times because they flew by the Hollywood sign. So it was kind of neat. But yeah, so I worked for 26 Cavalry out there in Hawaii for a year, and it was the best job I had in the Army. I loved it. The people were amazing. The cool thing about Army aviation is that like everybody in your unit, they're all what's called warrant officers for the most part. So you have all the pilots are these warrant officers. So they're not enlisted, but they're not like lieutenants and captains and majors. They're these like middle rank, but they're super chill. They just want to fly. They're a lot of fun. They're very easy to get along with, and they don't cause a lot of trouble. So that was a lot of fun. Had a good time out there, and I picked up, I picked up so many hobbies over the years.
I know
in Hawaii I started.
I saw some of your stuff when you were in Hawaii. You were getting into photography, taking like landscape stuff, and that was always interesting to look at your photos. Yeah,
I started kind of dabbling in photography in Arizona. And I got a GoPro in Arizona. I was like, while I'm riding dirt bikes, so I put this on my helmet, I can take video. And so I started doing that, and that was fun. And of course, the way that goes is you're like, oh, well, I need the next better model. Oh, wait. Oh, there's another. And you know what? I'm just going to get a DSLR. I need, and you end up, and you, once you realize the limitations of your cheaper gear, which GoPros are awesome. I don't want to cast aspersions on GoPros, but once you realize the limitations, you're like, oh, I kind of need this other thing. And I need a better tripod. And you start, and all this, next thing you know, you have like all these filters and big lenses. And so, I got into, I love photography now. I haven't done it in a while because I'm in law school, which I guess we haven't talked about yet, but, I got into, let me see. I mostly did landscape, but I also did some other things. Like I shot a few weddings, which I actually kind of enjoyed. But I think I would have enjoyed a lot more if I had a partner to shoot with, like somebody else who can help me out, or I can help them.
Second shooter.
That'd be a lot more fun. Do you guys shoot? Yeah,
I shoot some photography. I've never done it for like jobs and stuff like weddings. He does wedding videography, but we don't do photos as much.
I think I've done like 12 or 13 wedding videos, things of that nature.
Wow.
It's not that many when it's actually people who do it full time, but I do it like a freelance. I usually have like 2 or 3 a year. But yeah, I'm familiar. Personally, when it comes to video, I like more of the one-man crew kind of thing because it lets me kind of stay in the shadows a lot, whereas the photographer has to be tasked with all of these specific pictures you have to get with the family and all that other stuff. And so I like video better. It keeps you in the shadows a little more, and you can just capture the day.
Yeah, and the problem I found is like if you're one person, you're trying to manage the camera. You're also trying to keep track of all the shots, make sure you get all the shots, and you're managing the lighting and like all this stuff. And it gets to be a lot. But I would have preferred, I think I would get back into it someday if I have somebody to shoot with. Probably not going to do it solo again. It's just not worth, it's too much stress, honestly. Also, like there are a couple times when you have to get the shot, like the kiss, for example. And if you've got 2 shooters, you can both shoot. And then if one person, missed focus or something like that. But if it's just one person, you're just shooting on burst and hoping.
Does that make you nervous? So all of the things you've done, that makes you nervous.
Well, of course. Yeah. Have you dealt with brides?
I have.
I'd rather deal with the Taliban than a bride.
I have, and that has caused me to have a 4-camera setup during the ceremony.
That's smart.
Because I do video, so I can just put it on a tripod and hit record. I have Joshua sometimes there to monitor 1 or 2 of the cameras. But I have, and brides are not fun when you mess up. So...
Yeah, let me I just realized what I said. I meant to say I'd rather deal with the Taliban than an angry bride. I think I said than a bride. That is not what I meant. Please, nobody twist my words. You know
I know
what
you mean, man. But that's crazy, dude. That's funny.
What else? Yeah, more recently. So after...
You got really good at photography, by the way. Like, you've gotten really good.
Oh, thank you.
I really enjoyed following your Instagram and stuff of all the beautiful landscapes.
Thanks. Yeah. I appreciate that. I also got into a little bit of like underwater.
I saw that.
I would free dive. So I started by just taking a GoPro. And then, like I said, you're like, oh, I could really get more detail in the shadows if I got an underwater housing for my DSLR. And then you convince yourself like to buy the underwater housing, and then you do that.
And then you're like, I need
that's what I ended up doing.
Freaking 120 frames per second at 4K so I could see the bubbles, man. I could see the bubbles in slow motion.
I never went with the whole light setups and everything underwater, but I did some underwater photography, mostly of dolphins. I would go out on the west side of Oahu. I lived on Oahu, which is the main island.
I think
it's the most populated island. That's where Honolulu and Pearl Harbor are. So that's where I lived. Out on the west side, I would go out there all the time and do some free diving and a little bit of spearfishing and photography and stuff like that. But then, while I was out in Hawaii, I realized my time in the Army was coming to an end and I had to figure out something else to do. So for a variety of reasons, I didn't want to stay in the Army. Reasons that I won't get too much into it, but basically the Army was going in one direction. And in my opinion, it's, unless you're like top brass, you either get on the train or you get off the train, one or the other. If you're like in a position where you can actually impact things, like you're some top brass, maybe it's different, but as a captain, I'm a cog in the machine. So I got off the train, and I went to law school. So now I'm at University of Georgia School of Law, and I'm a first year, which is crazy. I'm actually not the oldest guy in my class. A lot of people warn me about that. I'm not the oldest guy. I'm older than average, but not too much. But since I've been here, I've started podcasting, which is awesome. I really like that. I only do audio though. I don't do the whole video.
A lot of people don't. The thing is, yours. I've listened to I think 3 episodes of your podcast. It's called Made to Be Broken.
Made to Be Broken.
And it's really good information. It's very heavily on. What's your little tag as far as like describing in a sentence? Has to do.
It's exploring the human side of law school and the law.
And that's an interesting title.
So ultimately, the idea with my podcast, what I'd like to do, and I didn't mean to cut you off, but what I'd like to do with that eventually is, I'd like for it to be a place where I can talk about legal issues of the day with people, with like experts, with professors and lawyers and my friends who are lawyers. The thing is, right now I'm not a lawyer. I'm a first year law student, and I very much stay away from like legal issues. I don't want to talk about the law because even if I do understand it, the perception of a first year law student talking about the law is not great, and I don't think people would react to that very well.
I understand.
So right now we mostly focus on like, what's law school like? Who are these people who go to law school? What are they really like? Who are, what's their background? What are their struggles? What do they like? What do they dislike? Stuff like that.
It's fascinating. And it's a great time to do it too. I mean, starting a podcast about law and interesting subjects around that, it's great to do it like, enter into it in your first year, being humble about it, dipping your toes in, growing an audience, and then by the time you're actually done, you're a lawyer. Are you planning on being a lawyer? I guess
that's the plan.
That's the plan.
Yeah.
We'll see if I pass law school.
I have a feeling. I mean, you've done a lot of stuff. I have no doubt. But once you're a lawyer, then you've already got yourself established, not only as education-wise and experience, but also
maybe a following
maybe
for your
a following too.
podcast.
Maybe a lot of people you can help.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where I feel like everybody thinks I never intend for that to be like my job. I'm not going to be a podcaster. I want to be an attorney.
Absolutely.
But I think it's important to have outlets to talk about things. And I know that a lot of people get stuck in the mindset of like, oh, I need 200,000 followers to be big or whatever. And I don't see it that way at all. I get a few listens on my podcasts every week. And it varies, sometimes it's like hundreds. Well, it's sometimes it's less.
Are you on Spotify? Is that where people can find you?
Yeah, we're on Spotify, Apple Podcast. I think it's like 7 different platforms. I distribute through Anchor.
Yeah.
So they distribute it all for me. I don't deal with that.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is like, even if I only had 20 people listening, I mean, that's 20 people. Like I think that's interesting. And I get feedback from people, send me emails, people shoot me Instagram messages. I think it's really cool. I really enjoy listening to podcasts, especially long form ones, because I have to do chores. I have to, listen to something while I'm trying to fall asleep, which isn't probably good sleep hygiene, but
I mean, I don't know. I do the same thing though.
Yeah. Well, I'm cutting the grass. If I'm driving, I'm always like listening to a podcast, and I love just like hearing people talk about their experience with something, especially if it's something I'm not that familiar with. It's interesting. Yeah. So that's what I'm doing. The plan is to work in Atlanta once I graduate, probably. I mean, this could all change, but I think I'm going to do commercial litigation down in Atlanta, but I'm also interested in like Second Amendment litigation, as well as criminal defense.
That's fascinating.
I'll probably do that pro bono on the side.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the plan.
That's fascinating. So, what a crazy story. Yeah, I mean, I mean, you covered a lot.
It doesn't seem crazy to me. It's
crazy, man. I mean, it's a good crazy. It's incredible, all the things you've done. I'm curious, how much? What time are we at?
I think we're almost at an hour.
I'm good for about 10 more minutes. If
gotcha.
You are.
I just have a couple more questions. Do you have a question that's been brewing in your mind at
all? No, I like how you emphasized like you don't think your life is very interesting, but I mean, everybody has a story to tell.
Everybody's interesting.
Yeah,
and I think you're particularly interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks.
Okay, so real quick, what is it that you hope out of your podcast? People, what would you like to see if you were to help one person with your podcast? What is your hopes for that person to be able to be helped? Like maybe specifically or just in general, what is it that you hope for the main goal of your podcast?
Man, that's a really good question. I don't think I've thought about it, but one of the main reasons I started my let me talk this through a little bit. I might find an answer to your question.
Sounds good.
One of the main reasons I started my podcast was, one, I like podcasts. Two, I'd always kind of wanted to start one, but I just never had, because I never really had anything to say, or never thought I did. So coming into school with COVID, I was terrified that I wasn't going to meet and like get to know my classmates, because the only time I see them like every other day, and we're all distanced and we have masks on and stuff. And I knew that I was coming to school. Georgia's a good law school, so you get people from literally all over the country, mostly like East Coast-ish, but I mean, not even. Like, we've got guys from University of Michigan, Ohio State, Columbia, Princeton, like all the way. It kind of spans the eastern half of the U.S. At any rate, you've got all these fascinating people with interesting stories. And like we're kind of saying, they probably might not even think they're interesting.
Yeah.
One of the guys I interviewed recently said to me, like, he was like, I don't really think it, like I was talking to him for like almost an hour, and I was like super fascinated by what he was saying. And we get done. He's like, yeah, I'm sorry if that didn't go well. Like, I don't know if anybody's going to want to listen to that. And I guess the one thing that I would like people to know right now is that I'm not trying to like boost anybody's ego, but like, you are interesting in your own way. Everybody is. And to extrapolate from that, everybody else is interesting. And you can learn something from everybody you meet. Whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, you can learn something probably good. I don't care how bad of a person you might think they are or they seem to be. You can learn something from everybody you meet, because that person is interesting. They're unique. They're an individual. They have a backstory. They're a complex being. And I think especially nowadays, when a lot of our interactions with people are very shallow, it's easy to see people as kind of this 2D caricature of themselves.
Yeah.
Because all we see is what they post on social media or something like that. And I think if we could all just like take a step back and see people as like complex and interesting and valuable, I think we'd all be better off. So for right now, I think if people can take one thing away from my podcast, that's what it would be.
That's great.
And yeah.
And I guess we got a golden opportunity then, because you're interviewing people for your podcast to, show that people are interesting. So someone's got to interview you. So we did that today.
Yeah. And I didn't even ask you.
No, I'm looking for people.
What's funny about that is like, I understand the reaction of like, I don't have anything interesting to say. Cause when you messaged me, I was like, I mean, you can interview me, but like, all I can tell you about is like what I like my life. It's not, I really haven't done any crazy spy stuff, like, undercover sneaking into some other country. I have not done that. And if I did, I wouldn't tell you, but I really haven't. So,
that's what he wants us to believe.
To me, it's like, this is the catch 22. Yeah. But yeah, it's been really good talking to you guys.
Absolutely.
I wish I could. Now I feel selfish because I was just like,
no. That's what you're here to do. That's why you're here, and you do have an interesting story.
That's why I did it. I wish I could ask you guys more questions.
No, this is our podcast, so we ask the questions. Also, so
do you want to plug your podcast one more time?
Plug your podcast and any socials you want people to follow you at.
Sure. My podcast is Made to Be Broken, and it's on Apple Podcast. It's on Spotify. It's on whatever podcast app you use is probably on there. So go check that out and leave us a 5-star rating. And then, if you want to send me a message on the only real social media I use anymore, and I don't really even use that hardly, is Instagram. If you want to send me a message on there, it's Andrew.Ligon, that's Ligon.Fant, F-A-N-T. And that's all the social media I can think of.
Very cool. Yeah. Could I ask you one more question before we bounce?
Sure.
Because we do talk a lot about geeky topics and film stuff.
Yeah.
I'm interested to hear your perspective. Do you watch war movies at all?
Do I watch what?
War movies?
War
movies.
Yeah.
What is the...
I couldn't tell if you were saying war or horror.
Sorry. Battle, war.
Because I do not really watch horror movies, but I do watch war movies, yes.
What is the most, from your experience, realistic one? Because this is a debate we've had once or twice on this podcast.
Oh, man.
Okay, let me rephrase it. Maybe this might jog your memory. How realistic is Saving Private Ryan?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question because it depends on what aspect of war we're talking about.
Gotcha.
So I think the most significant aspect of war for most people who've been in one was the camaraderie and it's hard to even quantify, but like the banter back and forth that you do when you're just bored out of your mind. And Saving Private Ryan captures that excellent. Perfect. as far as the combat, I mean, I wasn't in World War II or anything like that. My experience was very different. So I would say, as far as movies go, Saving Private Ryan is fantastic.
Great.
It's one of my favorites. Yeah. And then as far as documentaries go, though, Restrepo with Sebastian Junger is the one to watch. So if you want a good war documentary, I think it might be on Netflix, but I can't remember. If not, just rent it on Amazon. It's well worth the $3 or whatever. But Restrepo is phenomenal. It kind of shows the same thing, but it's more of an updated version. It's, guys who are 18, 19, 20, 21, and this was filmed in 2009 or 10, I think. So it's fascinating. Sebastian Junger is also just a incredibly interesting individual. His books are great if you want to understand PTSD and what guys are facing coming home from war. Check out the book Tribe.
Okay.
Or I think he's been on the Joe Rogan podcast before. If you look at his interview on the Joe Rogan podcast, he's phenomenal.
All right.
So,
Thank you for joining us.
Cool, guys.
Do a quick plug, just like 20 seconds, and then we'll...
Okay. Subscribe to this YouTube channel, the podcast channel, and we also have a website, wiseworksfilms.com. And thanks for joining us on this episode.
Hey, thank you, Andrew.
Yep.
Yeah, hit subscribe and ring the little notification bell as well.
Notification bell. We don't ever say that, but he makes a good point.
Yeah.
All right. See you guys later.
Andrew.
Thanks, guys.